Hello, and welcome to children's class. It's a delight to be able to talk to you this morning about some things that I've been thinking about recently. And yeah, talking to my phone is a little strange, but that's okay. I'm glad we can worship together as a church like this. So, I think for you children, school has been closed, and I'm just curious, is that bringing a lot of disappointments? Are we discouraged about that? Does it make us really mad? Or are we excited about not having school and not hanging out with our friends very much? Yeah, I think there's probably pros and cons to both. But I think for me, I have been meeting a lot of people the last couple of weeks with work, and I've noticed that a lot of people are just very discouraged. And I think all this discouragement going around and getting said to everybody is making life harder for all of us. It's a little bit like what Lavelle said last week about what's in your cup. Is your cup spreading joy? Is it overflowing with joy, or is it overflowing with fear? And what comes out gets spread to the people around us. And I especially notice that with people that are very joyful. Sometimes I get to a house and it's this older fellow, and he also doesn't have a job, and yet even though he's going through what the rest of us are, he's still choosing to be grateful for what he does have. And he especially is happy about the time that he has to spend with his family and building that up. And he even uses this as a way to witness and to talk about how God is still in control, and he doesn't need to be fearful about the future or about the moment now, about his job and everything that's going on, because God is in control and he can't change it. So why worry about it? Because it's in God's hands. And so that attitude is totally different. And I hope we can all have the attitude of relying on God and leaning on him through this time, and not getting discouraged and spreading that to people around us. So let's turn to Luke 12, verse 32. And Luke 12 is a chapter that talks about just God's love for us. And it's the same chapter that talks about the raven, and it talks about the lilies, and then it talks about the grass in verse 28. God so clothed the grass. And then at the end of verse 28, it says, how much more will he clothe you, O ye of little faith? So God cares about those little things. But yet, he cares about us so much more. We are his chosen people, and we are created in his image. And he really wants to care for us, and he does care for us. We don't need to be afraid. And so, verse 32, it says, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So first, starting off with fear not. Fear not is said 80 times in the Bible, exactly like that, fear not. So that's really interesting. Why would it be said 80 times? I think God really doesn't want us to fear, and so much so it's almost like a command. Just fear not. And so why? It goes on to say little flock, and that's talking about the shepherd and the sheep. We are the little flock. So we are little. It stresses that we are little. And so in other words, we're small, we're weak. And that usually points out that, really we don't have things in control. We are small and weak. And the things about life are up to God, and he's in control. And if we try to make a schedule in the morning and we try to do exactly that all day and try to do things in our own hands, I think we know that sometimes God totally throws that off because he is in control. And then it goes on to say, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So there's three words in here that talk about God. First, it's the flock. So definitely we have a shepherd. We are the sheep, and he is the shepherd. And then it talks about the father. I think the father is my father is a very caring and loving father, and I hope we all have that idol of looking up to our father. And our God is like that too. He is caring, just like our earthly father. And then it goes on and it talks about his kingdom. So in a kingdom, there's a king, and God is also a king. He is that strong and mighty king on the throne that is ruling our life, and he is in control. So there's three different aspects of God here in this verse. And it also says in the end, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So God takes pleasure in giving us the kingdom and allowing us to be a part of his kingdom. And he is grateful to give us that. It's a gift. We don't need to buy it. We can accept it from him. And how much more does that make us want to trust him and to not be fearful? Because he accepts us as his chosen people into his kingdom. And there's a story I'd like to share that maybe points that out a little bit easier, makes it a little more simple. And so I'm going to quickly say that. So there was this little girl on an airplane, and this was a big airplane with 300 people, and she was in the middle of the airplane reading a book. And during the flight, they were up in the sky, and the pilot called over the intercom and said, "There's turbulence up ahead. There's a big storm and expect turbulence. So please put on your seatbelt." So everybody fastened their seatbelt, and here came this turbulence. It was to the point where people were praying, and even the cups were being spilled. Maybe they were overflowing with fear. I don't know. But people were really, really fearful. It was not a good flight. Yeah, you could hear little moans and squeals and of crying and just people praying, and all the while this was happening, there was this girl on the plane that was reading a book, and she didn't notice the fear around her, and you could tell she wasn't afraid of the turbulence. She just kept reading her book the whole way through. And so after this turbulence was done, and people realized they weren't going to die, this man beside her asked her, "Why were you reading the book? Why were you not fearful? Like, what's your problem? How could you read a book through this horrible turbulence, this horrible flight?" And the girl right away said, "My father is the pilot, so I have nothing to be fearful of. He would never let this plane crash." And I think that brings out a good picture of how we should view our Father in heaven, and how we should see that he really, truly is in control, and we do not need to be fearful through this time. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the service, and thanks for listening.